Welcome and good evening. Thanks for joining us with our uh, third in a series of conversations, part of the API Legal Outreach Building the Dream campaign. Tonight, we are talking about racial justice issues, and I am more than pleased and honored to welcome James Bell to our conversation. James is the founder and president of the W. Hayward Burns Institute. James is well known internationally, is a superstar of racial justice advocacy and the reform of youth justice systems. Thank you, James, for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you again, and thanks for joining us in this conversation. Um, James, I mean, you've done so much in the field of uh, youth justice reform, and we first met probably in college, worked together in the Western Addition. What motivated you to continue on with this work?
So thank you so much, Dean, for asking me to be a part of this conversation. It's an important conversation, I think, in San Francisco at this time. And what motivated me to do this work was always trying to represent poor people and people of color in their aspirations for equity in San Francisco, the state of California, and other places. And it basically just started with growing up and seeing what was happening around, seeing what people were protected from harm and which people were subject to abuse, and thinking about how unfair that was that certain people that were doing certain acts were protected and other people that were doing similar acts weren't protected. And so it's just a sense of basic fairness. And part of that, of course, was even the opportunities that were given to us in our generation around affirmative action. That people in public schools that were seen as okay but not functioning greatly, to be able to compete to go to college and then to go on beyond college to post secondary and professional schools, was something that was a great help to those of us that were given an equal opportunity. And once we got to those places, that we found that we could compete as well with those with people who had financial and other economic advantages. So my whole career has, as has been your career, has just been trying about leveling the playing field in a place that tries to deny that the field is level, and our job is to keep making it level for those who, so that everyone has an opportunity.
You know, you and I are children of affirmative action and studies, something that I don't think people today really appreciate. The fact that when we were in law school, I know for my class, at least one quarter of the class were students of color, and at least maybe 20 to 25 students who were African American, and 25 to 30 students are Asian, 25 to 30 students were Latino. But today, you look at these law school classes, and there are very few students of color. And I'm discounting a little bit Asians that are trying to make it on their academic kind of scores. But if you look at the courts today, the advocates that we need, there are very few Black Americans and Latinx attorneys that are being allowed the opportunity to get a legal education and get licensed to practice. It's just a tragedy to me. And as we just talked about a mutual friend who has retired. As we start to leave the field, I'm worried that there aren't too many bodies to replace us.
Right. And that's a totally legitimate worry, because not only at law school and medical school and any of the postgraduate programs, even in college and university themselves, I mean, it has become that community college is where you find most people of color because of the economic and academic hurdles that are put in the way. And the Asian American community has learned that by achieving academically and doing what you can to do that, that tries to even the playing field so that you can't be denied based on your academic achievements. But each culture, each ethnicity has a different journey in the American experience. Black folks have a different journey from Asian Americans and Native Americans and Latinx folks. And so each ethnicity has to have its journey. And what affirmative action was trying to do was to actually accommodate those journeys and give the young people, the children of those parents and those people that were in America trying to make it a better chance. I can remember in high school saying, why is it that we can't read about different cultures? Why do we have to keep reading The Great Gatsby and these kind of American novels and not read about the people that I see around me? So why is it that we can't read about indigenous people and African Americans? And so we had to strike and walk out. Affirmative action wasn't given. It was something that we worked very hard to be able to see ourselves in the curriculum. And so now we have, writers that are recognized as having said something in these different ethnicities. And so it's no doubt in my mind that, in fact, those that are the gatekeepers of power are not going to want to have um, more equity and equal voices. But this is a fact that can't be denied. 3 years ago, I think the graduating class in high school 3 years ago in 2017 was the last high school class that was going to be majority white. So 2018, 2019, the majority of high school graduates are people of color. And at some point, they're going to demand a curriculum that meets their needs and looks like them. And similarly, last year was the first year that the most babies born in this country were young people, were babies of color. And so these demographics are not going away. And this notion of having curricula and a society that begins to look like the people that are in it is forthcoming. And folks need to be prepared to accommodate that reality.
I think a lot of people are kicking and screaming that reality. They can't take it, as we've seen over the last 4 years. But before we leave the subject of affirmative action, uh, the thing that really kind of continues to disturb me is the notion that affirmative action allows equal educational opportunity for less qualified students or less qualified employees if it's a job site, which is totally mythical, right? Because in fact, students of affirmative action or of job equal opportunities have more skills than those that are going in, the traditional way to college or jobs. They have cultural skills. They have language skills. They have skills that they bring from their families that you cannot learn in school. We don't hire students from law school at our organization who have the best grades or may make law review or what have you, those traditional measures. We need people with compassion, empathy, who know how to serve people in their communities. And that's another thing that you don't learn in school. It's something that you bring as an inherent skill from your families and your background. So to say that affirmative action is allowing underqualified applicants into jobs and schools is just ridiculous.
Right. And it speaks to your values. because a test score doesn't speak to what kind of values you have, what kind of empathy you bring, what your drive is, the kinds of things that make you a better person and a better professional. And what we've learned is over time, as you and I have grown in our careers, in the last 20 years, corporate America, the arts, literature, everybody is beginning to understand that a more diverse work environment is more interesting, it serves more people, and it's more creative. And we know this from the research on networks. We know that people of color have the least amount of networks into the power elite, but we also know that when they get there, that the dynamism of the places change. And so, if you want to be creative, if you want to make money, if you want to increase your customer base, if you want to be have schools that are more interesting and have a variety of discussions, you need to diversify. And as we know, this genie is not going back into the bottle because our demographics are telling us by 2028 and 2032, the number of white people in this country is going to be a minority, period. And so the standards of what we measure things against are changing. And we can see that in everything from makeup, hairstyles, music, art, you know, literature, sports, everything is going into a more diverse country. And those that don't like it are just going to be mad and eventually die off. And those that embrace it are going to be more ready for the future.
I think for a lot of people, it's not changing quick enough, James. Uh,
Good. Get out there and make that change.
I think that's what we're trying to encourage people to do today. When we were coming up in the Western edition, and I know the discussion about affirmative action is about us, an introduction to you and I, but also it really is a key part of racial justice in this country. To provide equal educational opportunity, we need to provide equal employment opportunities for folks, and that was a key component of an effort to do that, and it's gone away. But when you and I were coming up in the Western Addition, there was a very natural alliance between the Asian and African American communities, especially in San Francisco. It seems like, I mean, you and I are from Southern California, and if you remember what the Crenshaw district used to look like, and other parts of LA, similar to the Fillmore, where there was for political, economic, and historical reasons that Asian and African American communities were right in their own in the same areas, right? And so there was a natural affinity, which kind of spoke to our office, the office you and I worked in the Western Addition. Do you have any thoughts about that natural connection?
Yeah. To me, what I always loved about it, one, it was the vibrancy, but two is what oppression brought. So the Western Addition was a traditional Japanese community. And when World War II was declared against the Empire of Japan, folks were put in concentration camps, and Black folks were brought out as economic opportunity for the war machine. So both different forms of oppression. Um, Japanese folks were put in camps, and Black folks were put in neighborhoods that were segregated, but we wanted their labor. And then after the war, when Japanese folks came back to their homes and Black folks were there, this was two communities that were finding a way through their oppressions to try to come together and understand each other culturally. And the vibrancy of that was just incredible. And when you look at that neighborhood now, it's been gentrified. It's basically all similar. And it's lost, in my opinion, a lot of the cultural diversity, a lot of the vibrancy that made it what it was. Japantown and the Fillmore coming together and celebrating together, during the Cherry Blossom Festival and Juneteenth is something that we lost, and it's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy. It kind of it has been repeated, it seems like, throughout the country where there's been this displacement, usually at the hands of some public, so-called public good, like the redevelopment movement in San Francisco, which displaced both the African American and Asian American, Japanese American communities in the Western Addition. And the result was the empty uh, buildings and the empty fields of land where buildings used to stand. All that time that we worked at the Western Addition Law Office, we were surrounded by empty lots. I can still remember that, and for years they stood empty because redevelopment decided all the poor income Asians and African Americans had to go, and then they couldn't get it together in order to rebuild moderate income housing. And even when they did rebuild the housing, none of the folks could afford to move back into San Francisco. So the damage had already been done. But politically, I think it also kind of stands for, it's symbolic of the affinity, the connection that we've had in the political civil rights, social justice movements of the 60s and 70s. There's no doubt that Asian Americans have benefited, have stood on the shoulders of the civil rights movement started by the Black American community in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And it was natural, I think, for us to be part of that movement as you said, as oppressed people. Once you stick somebody in a concentration camp, I think you forever change a whole group of people in America, and you change them to be very connected to the oppression that occurs even today with the Black Lives Matter movement. So, um, do you see that in the work that you're doing with multiple communities across the country?
Yes, because as we've talked about, Dean, it is inevitable. So once it is that you understand about, John Powell at Cal has the notion of othering and belonging. And once you understand that all those people that have been othered are been treated similar to you, maybe not exactly like you, as we've said, each ethnicity has its own journey. But all of the people of color in this country have been othered at one time or another, from the Chinese to the Filipinos, Latinos, and Native Americans and Black folks, for sure, brought here as enslaved people. And the question that we are always doing in this work that we are looking for is to go from how do we move from being people that were othered into belonging? And how is it that the institutions and the systems built in this country are built for us to belong? And we're not going away, we're not going anywhere. And so either you create a vehicle for us to belong, or we're going to create one for ourselves, which is what the struggle in America is for every race and ethnicity. And each journey is different, but its path is the same way, is to feel like they are a part of the fabric of the country that asked them to come or brought them here to contribute. And we are incredible contributors, and we contribute better together. Sometimes we're on our own pathways, but we are going to be contributing. And so we are going to move from othering to belonging. And that is, I think, is the journey for the next generation. What does belonging look like for all of us?
I think in the next segment we will get further into what James is describing, the vehicle, the pathway, and we're going to take a short pause right now, and we'll be back with you in just a minute. Welcome back to our conversation with James Bell, founder and president of the W. Hayward Burns Institute. James, I don't know if you saw those photos that they've put up on the slides, but one of them is us at an anti-Baki demonstration in front of the federal building in the in the late 70s.
Indeed. Yes.
And I think you were yelling the loudest of anybody there. And the other is our staff participating in the Black Lives Matter March in Oakland last year.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like so long ago. We covered some historical perspectives, but before we kind of move on to the present, I just wanted to say something that had been coming to my mind a lot, and that is to kind of acknowledge the folks at the Western Addition Law Office that we worked at. Arnold C. Ellis was kind of my legal mentor, who kind of paved the way for my work there and now. And unfortunately, Arnold has passed. And I also wanted to acknowledge Maddie Moss. I don't know if you remember Maddie, but
of course,
Maddie was admin assistant at the office, and she kind of was my life tutor because Maddie was straight up telling me exactly what the honest and straight opinion was that she had of what was going on in life. So I mean, those people still are with me and help my work. Do you have any memories of those days?
Yeah. So I started the Hayward Burns Institute 20 years ago, and the Western Addition Law Office was the model of the culture that I wanted to create when I started my own nonprofit. I never thought that I would be able to do what it takes to start my own nonprofit. I run it like a small business, but to try to set the culture that we had at the Western Addition Law Office, that I would tell my staff, and this is what I loved about that was such an early work experience in my life, was that we may not be a family, but we're a community. You know what I mean? And so as a community, we have to take care of each other. And, we try to get rid of toxicity. We try to have direct communication with each other so that people aren't talking behind each other's back or cliques in the office. And if I hadn't worked at the Western Addition Law Office, I didn't know that such a working environment was possible. We didn't have any cliques. Nobody talked behind each other's back. We had each other's back. If somebody was trying to get a brief out and needed help, people would step in. If somebody needed to run to City Hall and get some papers and stuff, and it's like, while you're there, can you grab some stuff for me? And it was like, great. And every other day, not every day, because we'd have weighed 900 pounds, every day, Dean, every other day, you would bring in a pastry from the Japanese bakery, and we would all chow down on the pastry. And it was that kind of office. And it is the best working environment I've ever been in. And until I created the one that we have now, where we strive to emulate that office. And I strive to be, although not being complete, I strive to be like Arnold was. I never forget a time. This is an anecdote. So the office was on Fillmore and Geary, in a bank. I don't know what it is now. I don't know what it is now. I think it's a sushi place or something now. But anyway, it was in an old bank, and it was not far from my house, so I could take the number 5 to the 22 and get right off the bus and get to work. So every one day a week, every lawyer had intake, and all the clients that came in that day, that was your intake day. And so I got there for my intake day, and I was 10 minutes late. And I walked in and I was like, hey, what's up, everybody? Okay, I'm ready for my first client. And before the first client came in, Arnold walked into my office, and I'd never seen Arnold like that. And he said, "You are 10 minutes late. Don't you ever disrespect yourself. Don't disrespect our clients, and don't disrespect your colleagues that have to make excuses for you as to why you're 10 minutes late. We are here to serve these people. Their time is valuable. And so I never want you to be late again. It's disrespectful to you and it's disrespectful to them." And I was just speechless. I said, "Okay, Arnold, I'll never be late again." And I was never late again. He didn't yell at me. He didn't scream at me. He just said, "We are here to serve these people and don't
Mm,
disrespect them." And I will
mhm.
never, ever forget that lesson. And it is something that I hopefully have taken with me to the organization that I run now. So the Western Addition Law Office is huge in my professional life. And I am so glad it was really one of the first offices I worked in.
Yeah, I wish he would have yelled at me about that. So,
Well, you
as we
were
move
never late.
forward, oh no,
You
that's
were never
not true, James. You know that's not true. Moving forward, the killing of innocent Black Americans like Breonna Taylor and George Floyd seem to have woke up America all of a sudden. At least for a couple of months, people were paying attention. I'm not sure how long the interest is going to last, but they kind of became aware that this country has a history of violence against people of color, and it started with as far back as the genocide of Native and Indigenous people in this country. We need to continue our efforts that somehow have penetrated the more general public. What are your thoughts about? And we talked last segment about different vehicles and different pathways. I mean, what are your thoughts on how we progress from here? You talk nationally to young people and to all types of organizations. What's your sense of it?
So that's a really interesting question, Dean. So my sense of it is that the notion of what our society has been willing to do in the name of safety is increasingly becoming delegitimized and bankrupt. And young people see it for what it is, and they have not bought into the myth that the only way for us to be kept safe is to have custody, control, suppression, and domination of people. Because we know that those people that are the purveyors of that kind of violence don't do that with their own kids. When their kids need something, they get them as much help as possible. It's just when it's other people's kids that they treat like trash. And so for me, I think the biggest step is that young people understand that the institutions of justice just don't work. They may not know the data. They may not know that the recidivism rate is at 65%. They may not know that it costs in San Francisco $230,000 to put somebody up at juvenile hall for a month. They may not know those numbers, but they know that there's nothing good in the way that we are doing justice. And what I believe is happening, and that I am totally in support of, is young people um, they aren't as experienced and they haven't been around as much as those of us who are older, but they also realize that by organizing, they can make a difference. They know that people sitting around tables talking about policy is not going to make a difference. It is organizing, and it is being heard, and it is challenging those people that are in power to say this is not sustainable. You cannot keep sending cops into our neighborhoods and beating us down and expecting this to work as a way that we become a community. And so once they no longer buy that myth, they don't buy that hype, they're like, so how can we do this differently? What might work differently rather than calling 911 and bringing a SWAT team out here? Because that doesn't work. It's not like the shootings have reduced as a result of that. And so what people are doing is understanding that these institutions that have supposed to deliver us safety and community well-being are not doing it. And they can't convince us that they're doing it. And young people are trying to explore different ways to do it. They're young, they don't quite know, but they know what doesn't work. And what they're saying is this don't work. And we need to think of something else. And that to me makes me eminently hopeful. And we see it happening. We see people saying, why are we calling the police when somebody has a mental health problem? Why don't we call somebody that's a mental health specialist? Why do we call the police if somebody's homeless? What can the police do? The police can't buy them a home. Why do we call on the police for that? Maybe we should be able to house them and have some kind of services for them. So it's these opening questions that I think is the journey for the new generation. And I see that actually those conversations are starting to be had.